Welcome to the second video in our short series on getting started with Redux Toolkit. We left off last time having gotten our app to the point where we had a screen capable of displaying a loading, error, or default state. In this video, we'll start talking to an API. We'll write a network request that fetches an initial set of users, and on the client side, we'll render different UIs depending on the state of the request. Let's get started. Before we get started writing code, let's talk a little bit about the API that we'll be using. We'll be using this publicly available random user API, which exposes information that your run-of-the-mill social networking app might want to consume. So lists of users, each with user photos of varying sizes, name and address information, things like that. Now, of particular interest to us is the fact that this API has a paginated endpoint, so we can load our list in a paginated fashion as we scroll, grabbing chunks of, say, 10 or 20, so that we can render our screen in an efficient manner. So here's the endpoint that we'll be using. It accepts query parameters, the page that we're on, the number of results that we want for any given call. So with that preamble out of the way, I think we can get started writing code. Let's create a new file called apiclient.ts. So I think I want to start off by creating a network response type. And it'll be generic over a type T, which will be the payload we expect. It'll have a kind, which will be either success or failure. It'll be of type string, and then the body will be of type T. So let's add some type safety to our kind here. We can define a response kind up above, and it'll be either success or failure. Awesome. And so now we can make this kind property of type response kind. And now we can actually write the request. We'll write a fetch users request, which will take two arguments. One will be the page that we'll ask the API for, and the other will be the count, which will just be the number of results that we'll expect from the API. Awesome, and it'll return a promise of type network response, and as our payload here, we'll have an array of type user. Awesome. So we'll use React's fetch API here to hit our endpoint. We'll just pass in the random user endpoint. I'll just paste it here. Perfect. We're passing in our page and count. Method is get. Headers, we'll have accept header, JSON. Same goes for content type. Excellent. And now we'll check our response. If it's okay, we'll try to grab the JSON from it. It's asynchronous, so we have to wait there. Perfect. Okay. Now we'll return kind success, and our body will be JSON.results. Cool. Now in the case of failure, we want to return a network response of type failure. Type error. Oh, we should make our body optional because our failure here will not have a body to pass back. Now we can hop over to the slice we created in our last video and use Redux Toolkit's create async thunk API to expose a function that will call through to what we just wrote in our API client. Create async thunk is a function that accepts a Redux action type string and a callback function that should return a promise. It returns a thunk action creator that will run the promise callback and dispatch the lifecycle actions based on the returned promise. This means that we'll be able to hook into its state, which can be pending, fulfilled, or rejected, and drive our UI based on that. So let's fill out our thunk action here. We'll call it fetch users, and we are going to want it to return an object with our collection of users that we'll get from the API client. And as an argument, we're going to pass to it an object with the page number that we are going to pass through to the API client to fetch from the API. Cool. So let's fill out the rest of this function signature here, passing the page through and destructuring. And here we're going to call our API client. It's async, so we need to pass in await here. Got to make sure to import it as well. cool. Call fetch users, passing in our page. And for our count, we're just going to pass in hardcode 10 for now. So we want 10 results. Now our response, if it is successful, we are going to want to return the users that we got from the API. And that is the body of the response. And we're going to coalesce to an empty array because it's optional. And if it is not successful, we will throw an error. And now, like I mentioned before, we can actually hook into the lifecycle events of our async thunk using what are called extra reducers. So extra reducers are kind of a key concept for Redux Toolkit. What they do is allow a slice to respond to actions that are created by anything else in the app, really. So our async thunk creates actions for the pending, fulfilled, and rejected states. And using extra reducers, we can respond to them within our slice here. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so we're going to pass in a builder argument, and we're going to add individual cases for that. First, for our pending state, we are going to modify the state of our slice here, and we're going to set loading to true and our error to undefined. Awesome. We'll add another case for fulfilled. And here we'll modify our state as well, and we'll pass in an action, which will contain the user's payload from the API. All right, so we'll set our loading state to false, and we'll set our user state to the action payload. Awesome. And finally, we'll add a case for the rejected lifecycle event. So here we'll modify state as well. We'll set our error to true and our loading state to false. So now, in the component that we created in our last video, we can actually hook into these lifecycle events. So let's go over to our component. In useEffect, let's trigger an initial fetch by dispatching the fetch users action that we just created. We'll start by importing useDispatch. And then we'll implement useEffect here. And inside useEffect, we'll dispatch our fetch users action. Awesome. So now if we run our app, let's resize the window here so we can see. On initial load, we should see our network request go out. Okay, great. There's our 200 response. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that the structure of the JSON returned from the API doesn't look remotely like our user type. So we'll want to serialize this response in a way that we can render, but we can save that for a future video. In the meantime, let's just see what this JSON looks like on screen. Okay, well, it doesn't look like much. It looks like a big JSON blob, but that's something. I think we've accomplished our central goal here. Now, just to confirm that the UI updates as expected, we can head over to our API client and force a 404 by hitting a non-existent URL. So let's do that, and we should see the UI update with the error state. Perfect. So to recap, we've written a network request that fetches an initial set of users, and on the client side, we're rendering different UIs depending on the state of the request. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.